This one document is doing a comparison between Google Earth and the photographs and huge amounts of inconsistencies. Well, if that is the latest technology of surveying the lunar surface that is being reported in this document compared to the photographs and there's inconsistency, how in the 1960s could they map these things for them to go to those locations?
Good point. Yep.
I mean, that's a problem. I personally don't believe they had anything orbiting the moon prior to 1969, and I don't believe that they landed on the moon in 1969 to 72. If we have the technology to put and map stuff at today's scale, 2020, where this document was 2017, why would there be inconsistencies between what Google Earth shows for mapping and what the photographs show? What are they trying to make up? And of course, who was that guy from NASA that we don't have time for all of this?
Nitpicky claptrap.
That was done in, what, 97 or something? He made that comment?
Yeah, about 97. It was when David was interviewing people around the world on that.
Yeah, so they don't have time for that nitpicky claptrap. Well, how come these updated documents keep appearing everywhere if they don't have time for it? Why are they continuing on 20 plus years later with documents? And why are they still doing testing and producing even more documents? Why are they updating the old documents with nice new colored photographs and changing all of the information in them? It's just unbelievable. Just on the LEM alone, there's multiple updated documents on how this thing actually runs.
It's because people like yourself and Robert and me and Jara and Neil and all the other guys looking at it keep coming up with all these questions, and NASA have to answer them. And they answer them by just altering the documents when they realize they've been caught out. It's a bit sad, really, because they're just compounding the problem.
Well, apparently they have time for the nitpicky claptrap, then, don't they?
Well, obviously that's the thing they've got time for.
$20 billion a year on nitpicky claptrap.
Well, otherwise they're going to get found out, aren't they?
Yeah, because they haven't progressed anywhere. I mean, if they can't produce a product and they can just send it off to a clothing designer and have it manufactured, if it's that easy to do, then why the hell can't they?
Because what they're producing can't be used in space. It's not been tested. There's no evidence.
Good in front of a camera, though, isn't it?
Oh, it looks lovely in front of the camera.
That's the whole thing that they're doing.
Yeah, and people will believe what they want to believe. I mean, there are a dwindling number of people who now believe what NASA tells them is the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But there are less people prepared to go along with it. I find it very interesting.
I actually watched a little bit of a movie called Meteor from 1979. Sean Connery was in it. The basis of the story is a comet was traveling fairly close to the Earth, and they got into the Kuiper Belt, and it hit something in there and exploded, and of course the fragments were heading towards Earth. I mean, James Bond did much better in the 1990s when they were doing their space simulations. This thing looked like a 1960s movie by comparison, or 1950s movie, the way they portrayed the comet landing there. And of course, they had this spacecraft running around somewhere, surveying some stuff, and they were ordered to go have a closer look at the comet in the Kuiper Belt. And of course, within a day or so, they were there. And of course, the Kuiper Belt is between Mars and Jupiter, is it not? Yep. So they're out hanging around the moon in the movie, and then, just get out past Mars and get out to the Kuiper Belt to take a look. It was pretty hilarious. And of course, they saw the explosion and they died and everything out there and stuff. I had to quit watching it because the graphics were 1950s and 60s kind of stuff. It was really sad. Just the fact that all of these movies are out there and stuff like that keep people interested in space travel. And it doesn't matter how poor the production was of it. That doesn't seem to matter.
No, it doesn't.
And I think that has an effect on what NASA they can just do anything they want. I have a problem with anything that NASA has to do as soon as they leave the atmosphere, all of a sudden these vehicles are just magical.
Oh, they are absolutely magical.
They can speed up, slow down, change direction.
Turn
They can do
corners.
all of these things. Nobody is even talking about the environmental parts of the vehicle at any God-given time there. They completely ignore solar flares, and we've seen that recently. Even the data recording the solar flares on one channel, you can look at them. You can go out and see the actual data on the solar flares, and you're hitting a G3 or whatever, M whatever class of flare it is. And then the spacecraft that's so-called out there doesn't record anything. The ISS doesn't record anything.
And you'd think that would be the one thing they'd be looking out for all the time, monitoring it.
Absolutely. And you don't hear anything about satellites or anything else out there. You'll hear a little bit about Musk. He loses, some of the Starlink ones. You read the documentation on a solar flare and how much more activity is there and how the temperature changes and the radiation and everything else. And then you can read all the documents on bouncing signals off of the belts in different layers. And
Yep.
the tiniest little bit of communication coming from outside gets through. Diode, it only goes one direction. The information can come in, but you can't send a signal out unless you're talking to one of NASA's spaceships. Then all of a sudden, you can hear them just fine.
Yeah, it's called storyboarding, isn't it?
Yeah, and all SETI hears is white noise forever. Well, if you just go through the different images, they're showing the different locations that the photographs were taken at and what Google Moon is displaying. And they're showing the inconsistencies in the geological features between the photographs and what Google Moon represents. One of them has to be wrong. Why are they displaying it? Why is Google Moon not accurate? Or is the inaccuracy in the fact that these two companies don't communicate well enough and say, well, let's match it to the photographs? Both of them are simulated.
Well, it's interesting because figure 1A on page 3 of the box, they're mounting Google Moon and a section from point 1, which is 19.9 north, 30.7 east at negative 2380 meters left, to point 2, 20 north, 30.8 east at negative 2360 meters elevation. Now, then you go to this other figure down here. Now, that's figure 1B. And then it shows this little graph that's inserted from it. Now it gives you the elevation and distance in meters on a graph. Now, then when you go to Google Moon, why are the distances different in this other paragraph on page 4 in the box? Now we have an elevation of minus 600 meters at point 2 and an elevation of minus 2,700 meters at the other section. So that's kind of strange.
I know they're showing the inconsistency. My first question is, on Earth, zero elevation is sea level. There is no zero elevation on the moon. So where do you start measuring? You must take the lowest elevation and the highest elevation on the entire circumference of the moon and get whatever the average is to be zero, so you can be plus and minus. Zero elevation, but the moon would have to be absolutely 100% mapped at that point. And of course, in 1969, they never had that information. You could have an elevation. If you claimed you landed at a certain level, you could call that zero, and then the mountain is this much higher in elevation from your position. But you can't have a zero elevation like it's the same as we have sea level. You can take an average if it's completely mapped of the lunar surface and say, here's zero, and this is plus, and this is minus. This is showing the exact problem right here. And then if you actually take the photographs, how do you get mountains that are 10 to 15,000 feet in elevation when you're within a couple of miles of the peak of that mountain?
I know. It's very strange. The whole thing is...
It is interesting when you look at Mount Hadley here, and then you look at Mount Hadley in Google Moon. Well, what the heck's going on here? They're showing you the same peaks from the same angles and everything, and yet there is one peak that's missing. It's a little hump. This is on page 8. So now when you're looking at Hadley Rill from Apollo, and then you look at Hadley Rill on Google Earth, there's two little mountains there with one is in red arrows and then the other is in blue arrows on page 8 in the box. And now we have a completely different landscape in the background.
Yeah, it is quite different.
Yes, the one with the red arrows are from the photographs.
And it's the same thing on page 9 when we look at Swan Hills. When you look at Google Moon, they're not there. When you look at the other one in the bottom, rather, they're there. Where's Google Moon getting this from then?
They're doing it so-called from orbital satellites, right?
Okay, well then how come the orbital satellites could take these tiny little mountains and tiny little rocks and everything, and yet they can't have the LRO images clear?
Well, this is what they're showing. They're showing the difference between what the photographs are. They're showing two spots with the red arrows are from the Apollo photographs. And then what Google Moon is showing and how they have simulated the same area showing different features.
Then why is Google Moon doing this? I don't understand where they're getting this from. Then they're making a lot of mistakes. The Google Moon is making a lot of mistakes.
But surely the Google Moon images were supposed to have been created from the original Apollo photographs. It's the only place they could get them.
Or satellites or recent satellites that have been orbiting.
But those satellites wouldn't show the elevation that is appearing in the Google Moon pictures. The only place you'll find those is the Apollo photographs. I mean, this PDF document is quite clear in the first summary that they publish. Quite clear what they're talking about.
Yes, there shouldn't be these differences.
Yeah. Moreover, the Photoshop analysis shows conclusively that images were staged, manipulated, or altered. Well, you can't get more clear than that.
That's exactly what this document's all about.
Yeah, exactly. It's good that they've done it.
And this is published by the Canadian Centre of Science and Education in 2017.
Yeah, the Journal of Geography and Geology, published by the Canadian Centre of Science and Education. It's interesting that a lot of this analysis seems to be coming out of Greece.
Yeah, but what is interesting is the fact that they don't actually state outright that man never landed on the moon, except they're showing that the photographs are simulated.
Yeah, well, they can't make a definitive statement in a scientific article unless they can back it up with a lot of evidence. What they've backed up with the evidence is the Photoshop analysis. Now, if they're taking the original images from the Apollo missions, which I've always believed that they did, and I think they've said it on several occasions on Google Moon, why are they changing them? Why don't the photographs match?
Well, the topographical maps that so-called Google Moon has don't match the photographs. That's what they're showing here. Google Moon maps are so-called created from the orbiting satellites that are recording the geological features.
Yeah, and those maps were originally created by the US Geological Survey. So you'd think that they get it correct.
Yeah. And of course, now you're going back to the 60s where they were mapping it to find the landing sites in the first place. So I don't believe any of that. I believe the most that they started with was whatever they had off of their telescopes on the thing, and they took those images, put them on their big plaster ball, and created the moon that way. And any of the so-called mapping photographs in the 60s prior to the moon landing were done off of those plaster maps. And that's why we don't get more and more. But if we have satellites that are actually there today and are mapping it, there's going to be a hell of a lot of differences because if they're there doing it.
Well, if the whole thing was fabricated for political reasons, and perfectly valid political reasons, I should say, at the time, late 60s, then they had every reason to attempt to do it. Yeah. Because they couldn't actually physically get humans to the lunar surface, and they still can't, they had to fabricate it in as persuasive manner as possible. And that's what they've done, which is why a lot of people believed it. I believed it when it happened originally. I had no reason not to. Now I have every reason not to believe it because the evidence has been accumulating over the last 55 years.
Well, the thing is, they're just not quite coordinated enough to say, hey, this is how we depicted the moon. This is our detailed mapping of the moon. You have to reproduce that. They're not in coordination with Google Moon. like they were artists that were creating that lunar surface on that plaster, and then they photographed that. Well, it's not going to be accurate compared to a much more detailed, if you've got a higher resolution telescope looking at it today. Okay,
Definitely.
There's going to be differences.
They've highlighted the differences very well in this article, in this PDF. And they go into considerable detail about it. They obviously know what they're doing.
Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting document to look at. When you have published by a Canadian Center of Science and Education, and you see that Athens is in there, that they're working with Cyprus University and University of Technology, and then there's a facility of engineering and technology, Cyprus. They're right there. They got their emails right there handy for you to look at and everything else if you want to contact on it.
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, they're right straightforward. They're not trying to hide it. They're not trying to be like people that comment under our videos that try to hide all over the place. They put it straight out, and they have studied this in detail.
Yeah, they know their subject. They have to.
And they're certifying that result. They're publishing that result.
And they reach an interesting conclusion.
Yeah, well, like I said, the only thing it doesn't say in the article was that the moon landings never happened.
Well, they're implying a lot of that.
They're implying that Google Moon is a simulation and that the photographs are a simulation.
Yep.
And those two companies can't quite get their simulations together. But anyway, we need to talk about this Weezy being blocked.
What's going on with Weezy then? I haven't heard this.
Well, I'll just share the screen so everybody can see it.
Okay.
There it is there. There's what the Truth Project is saying.
Explain to everybody what the Truth Project is.
Well, that's Weezy's podcast. And I guess the real Buzz Aldrin took a look at some of his comments that he was making and blocked them.
Is that really Aldrin?
That's Buzz Aldrin. Dr. Buzz Aldrin, right there. You are blocked. You blocked Weezy.
So that's Aldrin's real channel then?
That's the real channel, the real Buzz Aldrin.
Oh.
And Weezy said, I'm honored to be blocked by Buzz Aldrin. And I sent him back a little message and I said, I guess the honeymoon's over because he's now playing back on the internet instead of with his new wife. I also wanted to tell him that at Buzz's age, the only thing is, he's just blowing dust. It's probably fake moon dust he's got left there. I thought it was great that Weezy got blocked by Buzz Aldrin.
It's a very good thing to publicize as well. It shows that he was reading and following what Weezy was doing.
Oh,
exactly.
Yeah. And so will a lot of other people. Weezy's produced some very interesting podcasts.
Yeah, well, maybe Buzz was watching us.
Could have been.
On Weezy's.
Yeah, we made comments
and
about
if he's not, he should.
Buzz is probably a little concerned that his participation in the faking of Apollo is going to come to light before he shuts out his lights. Maybe he's racing against destiny to ensure that his legacy is maintained as being number 2 on the moon. He wanted to be number 1, but the door stopped it. Oh dear.
I thought they had diapers for number 2.
They have that too. Yourself.
Yeah.
And number 1. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He must realize that it's all going to come to light whether he's alive or not. History books will record him in one light or the other. Either he went to his grave unknowing whether it was going to be revealed or not, that it was faked. He already knows the difference anyway.
Of course he does. Yeah. He's lived with it all his life. Must have been quite a bad effect on his mental health that he had to maintain this fiction, which is sad because he was a very good pilot himself. He was a good engineer. So why get involved in a fraud of this nature?
Perhaps when they signed up, the 60 astronauts that were signed up to be on the project had no idea.
No, they wouldn't. No idea when
they wouldn't. They're just signed up. They're going to be the pilots. They're going to be the crew to land on the moon. They had no idea that it couldn't be done. And then they're caught up in it.
Be interesting to know when they actually found out that they weren't going to go to the moon in reality.
64 or 5.
Yeah, about that.
They would have been there maybe a year, and then they were said, hey, And that probably has to do a lot with the people that they selected to simulate it. And they made a mistake when they picked Grissom, Chaffee, and White.
Well, especially Grissom. He was an honourable man. He wasn't going to take any crap. He was going to expose it, and they couldn't risk that.
Well, that's before the Lemon Law came out. That's why. That's how the Lemon Law was created, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Well,
He hung a lemon on the thing saying, here's the Lemon Law. You got to buy this thing back. Well, they couldn't do that. That's the Lemon Law right there. I guess you have to grow your own lemons, though, for it to really work.
Well, he was growing his own lemons, wasn't he? Probably waiting for the occasion to use it.
Yeah, we don't get lemons that size in the store in Canada.
No, it's a good-sized lemon, that one. It's good that we still got pictures of it. It'd be nice to have a picture of Gus Grissom actually putting the lemon on the command module. That's what he put it on.
Yeah.
I think they should put a little lemon logo on the new Prada suit.
Yes.
Well, like I said to Robert earlier today, I said, if it's Prada, they got nice handbags and stuff like that. And they just need to show the spacesuit with the handbag and one of those little fluffy dogs sticking out of it that they walk around with. I mean, if you've got a Prada purse, you got to have one of those little foo-foo dogs.
And a lemon alongside it.
Yeah, you put a lemon on it. Everything's got a lemon on it.
It's basically unraveling the story that NASA have put out. It's done pretty well. It's lasted 50-odd years. And a lot of people believed it. And a lot of people still believe it. That's the tragedy. They can't see the problems that exist by maintaining that story. And if they maintain the story, it's going to come back on them. You can't fool all the people all the time. You can start by fooling all the people all the time if your budget's big enough. But if your budget is decreasing and the number of people who are taking apart your story with increasing accuracy, you're not going to be able to maintain it. Why don't you just say, okay, guys, we'll come clean on it? No, they don't dare do that. Because as soon as they do that, as soon as NASA come clean and say, we did fake it, guys, the first question asked of anybody will be, well, what else have you faked? What else have we been lied to about? And then the whole thing falls apart.
I think that's probably why when we're looking at, they have these nice simulated flights to the moon and back today, they're not going to show you a star pattern. You have astronomers that would be able to figure out that where you were in space to take that. So they can't show that. They can't show details of a lunar surface. They can't even show you details of the Earth when they're shooting back to Earth. They like to just put the clouds over everything so you can't decide anything there.
I actually found one where you could see, but then again, it was from the ISS. They were over Africa on a zoom shot. Now, the funny thing was Africa was the Earth because the fisheye lens made it look like the Earth. The entire Earth was Africa. That's, I think, too, how they tricked you with Apollo.
They make Africa look the size of the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, because if you're only 200 miles up, even if you've got a fisheye lens, you're not going to be able to see much over the horizon at the point you are 200 miles up. Africa is a very big place. It's thousands of miles from one end to the other. And you've got lots of stuff in the middle. So they can't show it from the ISS.
They try their best in simulation to do stuff like that. But like I said, the detail, if they claim they orbited the moon or whatever with any craft, even Orion, there's no details.
No, that's true. That's
and
very
all
good.
of a sudden it goes to the dark side. All of a sudden the resolution is worse than anything we've ever seen. Can't make out any details on there because they don't want to. Do you know how much work it would take to try and match it to the other simulations they've done?
That would be a problem.
Well, that's what that document's showing.
Yeah.
Google Moon and the photographs don't match.
No, they don't match. It's
Okay.
interesting. On the first Artemis view, the only object that I could recognize, whether it was real or not, it was recognizable, was the Tchaikovsky crater, which is on the far side of the moon. That's the crater with the big central island. It's very distinct. It's about the only distinctive feature on the far side, the Tchaikovsky crater. And that's 60 miles in diameter.
And we have to wonder how that was simulated in the first place, on what map that was being done. Because like I said, anything of the visits that they claim to have had, were they able to do that? Were they actually able there in the 1960s? Because that's when that image was created.
Yep. He was. Well, the first people to photograph it was the Soviet Union. So maybe that was real. And because it's such a visible feature on the far side, it's a big crater with a very distinctive central peak. It had to be created for everything that was supposedly taken on the far side.
So if NASA is putting up bullshit and Russia's putting up bullshit, and Russia says there's a giant crater there that looks like this, then NASA has to comply and say, oh yeah, we sent something up there. Yeah, we saw it too.
Yep, of course.
Here these guys are. They're supposedly on the lunar surface. And here comes this Russian probe all the way across, and they just happened to catch that on film. Well, they didn't catch that on film because that was faked.
Right.
That was not caught on film in the real shots. Somebody put that up there just to show it. It was an illustration, but that's all it was. I've never been able to find the original, the real one that they say is out there. You will never find it.
No, but if you have two countries trying to bullshit each other, then one's going to have to say, well, yeah, we flew around the backside and we saw that big crater too, and we got a picture of it here as well. And then Russia's going to say, well, we weren't there, so how did you get that copy of picture that we faked? That would confirm it. If you're going back and forth with a country to say who's the most powerful, and if the U.S. believes that Russia went around the moon and took some photographs back there, then the U.S. turns around and says, well, we went around there too. We saw the same big crater as well. Russia would then know that they didn't do it, because if they didn't go in the first place and they just generated that image, and then the U.S. says, yeah, well, we went around there and we saw the same thing you did.
You know what's interesting about this article? It doesn't matter what page you look at. As soon as they go to the simulated version of this photo, first of all, you see stars in the sky. And second of all, you see every single thing there. Well, most of it. But you don't see any tracks from the rover, and you don't see any boot prints. Nothing.
Right.
Now, I wonder why that is.
That's a very good point, Robert. Very good point. Well spotted. If it was so easy to film it, and they were using the original Apollo photographs, of course the tracks would be there. That's what they're so keen to show us now.
Yeah, other than the fact that photoelectric charge that levitates the soil would have removed any indication that there was ever a track there.
Well, that's the same with the Apollo 16 rover. I mean, the thing's kicking up, well, let's just say it's kicking up a whole load of regolith because the wheels are sieves. And then all of a sudden it's going out in waves and hitting a wall. It's like it's hitting air. It's hitting air. You could see it stop.
It just goes up and straight down. And yet they've got documents that said it creates a perfect arc.
It creates triangular arcs, but
yeah, but if you don't have an atmosphere, then it would be a perfect arc. And then the arc that they create is just because of the lunar gravity, which they forgot all about. It's going to be 5 times or 6 times higher than that. And then the photoelectric charge is going to keep it there for the entire length of time that they are there. It's not coming down until the sun disappears. All that fine dust is going to stay there and just hang.
Isn't it amazing how that dust manages to get to such altitudes that you could see it from lunar orbit?
That's true. Yeah.
The whole problem is in terminology that people don't understand, because you're not floating in space.
Well, it's the same thing if you drop an elevator and you're in it and that elevator goes down at a certain speed. Well, you're not really floating. You're still falling with that elevator.
Right. But now you come into the other concept of what people believe at. If you're just sitting there floating, you give it a little push this way, it's going to go that way. You give it a push that way. You stop it. It only takes a little bit of force to move it if it's just floating. But it's not. It has a mass and it's traveling at a tremendous speed.
Yeah, you know what? NASA actually did a good experiment when they were showing this. They had that one woman hanging on a harness, on a zero-G harness, and they told her, now what we want you to do is go around to the outside model of the space station and just grab onto the handles and move yourself around. And she was having a heck of a time doing it, and you want to know why? Because she was starting to go so fast, she forgot about momentum, and she couldn't stop.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying with anything that's traveling, orbiting the Earth. you have that mass. You have the energy of the mass in equilibrium with the gravitational force. If you're traveling 17,500 miles an hour, you got a hell of a lot of potential energy there.
She's crawling along and she goes faster and faster, and now what happens is she can't stop because she's moving too quick. And she's not really going that fast, but they were just showing her just how much a tiny little bit of momentum built up. Try to stop it now. 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 Try to stop it now.